and welcome to Donor Dialogue. Each month, we will bring you a conversation with a community leader about the current state of philanthropy, the donor experience, and insights into the donor and volunteer mindset. I'm Lindsay Blok, Senior Vice President of CCS Fundraising, an executive team member serving in Southern California and across the Southwest. CCS has been a strategic partner with nonprofit organizations for more than 70 years, raising funds, planning and implementing fundraising strategies, and impacting the world through philanthropy. After working with nonprofit organizations for 15 years, I'm particularly fascinated by the donor perspective, how our volunteers view nonprofit organizations and philanthropy, and how we can all work together to improve our communities.
Today, my guest is George Abe. George is an adjunct assistant professor of entrepreneurship at UCLA Anderson School of Management. George joined Computer Sciences Corp in 1976, then became a business development manager at Cisco, where he became the product manager for data over cable products. In 1997, Cisco published his book, Residential Broadband, an early practical guide to what were then emerging network and internet technologies. After Cisco, George was a venture partner with Palomar Ventures and served on various corporate and nonprofit boards. In 2003, he joined the faculty at UCLA Anderson. He serves on the board of advisors for UCLA's Terasaki Center for Japanese Studies and Biotech Connection Los Angeles. George is a double Bruin, earning his BA in mathematics and MS in quantitative methods. He and his wife, Helen, have long been involved in philanthropy at UCLA. George, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Lindsay. Good to see you again.
See you too.
Maybe one of these days we'll actually see each other in person.
I know. It's getting closer and closer. I certainly hope so. Yeah. So George, you've been involved with a number of different nonprofits, lots of different shapes and sizes. Can you tell us which organizations you've been involved with?
Okay, the bulk of our philanthropy, Helen's philanthropy mine is UCLA, and that's through a variety of avenues. We are principal contributors to the women's golf team and the women's tennis team. We're pretty strong supporters of women intercollegiate athletic sports. I've donated to the math department where I got my bachelor's degree, and which I'm very proud to say is doing fantastically well. It's got one of the best math departments on the planet, I think, with Terrence Tao being a pretty famous fellow. The Terasaki Center has also got a little money, and of course, the Anderson School, where we're happy to be an example, if you will, to other faculty who maybe should be contributing more, but anyway.
Well, it's interesting. It sounds like a lot of your philanthropy is based on places you've been involved in.
Right.
How do you think about the organizations or the departments that you give to? Why certain women's athletic teams? Why Anderson?
There's a sense of gratitude there for Anderson. I owe a lot to them. I owe a lot to the math department at UCLA. I think they prepped me for life pretty well. My attachment to UCLA actually goes before I got to UCLA, because there was a high school math program that was sponsored by the National Science Foundation. I thought I was on my way to other schools as well, because I thought I wanted to leave Southern California. But after I spent a summer at UCLA, that convinced me otherwise. I've been very strongly attached to the school, again, since my junior year in high school. And that starts things off. You're off to a good start with a relationship with the institution, then it tends to stick with you. By the way, I didn't complete the list. Other institutions I frequently contribute to is the Pasadena Education Foundation, PEF, which is a support group of the public schools in Pasadena, where I matriculated. I also went to Pasadena City College. They also got a little bit of money of mine. So everywhere along the way where I got it, I think a good education has been small recipients of whatever we've given out. And then Helen is pretty active with the Providence Health System, series of hospitals in Southern California, where she's received some care, and her family has worked there. And the point is, we see these people do things. The public schools in Pasadena, I think, do a fantastic job. UCLA, Providence Health. These are nice people doing good work. They're sincere. They handle the money properly. And so you feel good about giving people who actually have more utility out of the money than we have. You look at the marginal utility of money, and when you have Freyermuth, and the incremental marginal utility decreases, but for institutions like that, it continues to be high, and we're cognizant of that. So we look for how people behave and how well they use the money, and how they help people, and that motivates us. As far as women's sports goes, women's sports have been underfinanced, and these are young women who work hard, and we really like the coaches. Carrie Forsyth is a friend of mine, as well as Stella Sampras, and these are really terrific people who are helping young women as well, whether or not they go into professional sports. So anyway.
And how did you end up meeting some of these coaches? I mean, it seems like there's a big departure between math and women's golf.
Well, I guess because I've been a basketball and football fan for a while, we were donors to the Wooden Athletic Foundation. They sponsor events in which they bring in coaches, and so I met Carrie that way. But I also knew that she had a fundraising golf tournament, and I do play golf myself, so she invited me to play. She organized that very well, which may be some tips I would offer you, CCS, on how to do some fundraising. But she organized the golf tournaments very well. I played. She paired us up with some of the women who play, and fantastic golfers and great young ladies. So you get attached to the players and the coach, and I've been participating in their tournaments for the last several years, and part of their marketing group now, trying to get more players to come in. So that's how it starts. It started with I think with WAF, Wooden Athletic Foundation, and same thing with Stella Sampras. My wife plays tennis a lot. She was been interested in tennis, but had no way of connecting to Coach Sampras. And so again, this WAF meeting, she connected with a couple of the players and with the coach, and now they got a pile of money from us. So that's kind of how it works out.
So that relationship and meeting people and getting to know them seems like one of the biggest ways that you and Helen make some decisions that you're giving.
Well, I think it's how any of us, any donors, make decisions, is not necessarily jumping in right away, but introductions or some other intermediary facilitate some kind of meeting. And I think this is one of the activities of people like you, CCS, or other donors need to focus on, is to, without maybe making the immediate ask, is to just create a network for the donors so they can get acquainted with each other and help things out.
Mm-hmm.
As we mentioned, people tend to donate when their friends donate or their acquaintances donate. And so I think facilitating this network is a key part of the fundraising exercise. Plus, the donors enjoy it. We like going to events, meeting folks, students, and in the case of Pasadena Education Foundation, meeting students and teachers and seeing what kind of things they're doing. And very nice.
So I have to ask, is it more about getting your chicken dinner at the event, or more about actually meeting the students or the golfers or spending time with the coaches?
I tell sponsors, don't waste so much damn money on the chicken dinners. I mean, we don't, most people who donate money are overweight anyway. We don't need that. And so save your money and let's meet the people, meet the beneficiaries. And I think people find that very very fulfilling. Now, of course, some people do want the nice dinners and all that, but Helen and I don't care about that. Well,
you and Helen both have it seems like your pet organizations that you donate to. How do the two of you think about your giving as a couple or individually? How do you make those decisions?
Both. We've been married 36 years, so of course it's joint. It's California, so it's community. However, we do have our little separate piggy banks, and well, I don't. She does, because she inherited quite a bit, much more money than I did, and a lot of that money goes into her philanthropy. Her mother was a physician in the Providence Health System, and that sort of kicked that off. And her mother created an endowment and a speaking program, I think it was. And so, she is. But it doesn't matter. If you've been married this long, you just go along with whatever the other party wants to do. It's not worth fighting over. So she's been very supportive of my golf philanthropy anyway.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned early on, your own giving to Anderson and maybe influencing other professors to give or seeing some of your friends give. Can you tell us about how your friends or maybe family members have influenced your own giving or how you've hoped to influence others?
Well, as far as my friends go, my friends are a pretty tight group. I mean, tightwad group. A few have donated to UCLA quite a bit, but I am influenced by others who have donated to primarily Japanese community causes, Buddhist church, that sort of thing. But candidly, they're not in the same financial situation I am, so they tend to be more modest. But when they have come forth, and that does influence me, and so I do donate to various causes in the Japanese community because of that, because they are friends of mine. So the museum, Japanese American National Museum downtown, the Little Tokyo Service Center, organizations like that, they don't need a lot, but a little bit means a lot to organizations like that. So you don't mind donating. And again, these are through people I know, and so that makes it easy for me.
Well, we talked a bit about the events being a big boost to your experience. What are some other things that organizations have done that have encouraged your own participation or investment in that area, or something that you've appreciated over the years?
Well, I think both Anderson and the athletic department at UCLA do a good job of that. For example, at Anderson, Dean Olean had events at her house for donors, and very nice, not fancy food, but stand up finger food, nice view, pretty high powered group, and those were very nice. And I think those were influential as well. We got to meet, again, students, recent graduates in particular, and faculty, and talk to other faculty that maybe I haven't met. Certainly my wife hadn't met, and that made things easier. In the case of the athletic department, they've sort of got this down to an art now. You have this cadre of major donors at the Wooden Athletic Foundation level, and these are people who have their names on the signs at Poly Pavilion, for example. Helen and I are on Poly Pavilion's wall there, whatever. And those people get together once every, used to be 6 months or a year when we could, and that's when you would get a lot of the coaches, a lot of the students. Once we got together at the baseball stadium, Jackie Robinson, once we got together at Poly Pavilion, they put tables around the concourse. And the various sports that had the little tables, and 3 or 4 athletes, they would sit us down to sports that we had not donated to. They're very careful about that. So one year we were in a table with a bunch of tennis players, and that's how the tennis thing got kicked off. So,
yeah,
you learn how to do things like that. And when things get back to life again, I suppose they'll be having some more interesting things as well. So, but it is organization, it is thoughtfulness, and having good lists, having a program that would appeal to the donors, prospective donors. You and I talked about women in philanthropy as well. I think that organization is changing, and that it is more welcoming to women who are, let's say, not the classic profile as they have been for the last 50 years. And because of that, I think that's a venue where there could be some money, and not only for UCLA, but maybe for some other causes. So I think women are really the sort of key to the growth of philanthropy, and I think those kinds of events would be very useful.
That organization's really creating that same network and showing, or giving examples of where people have donated, providing ways for people to create relationships all around philanthropy, which is really interesting.
Yeah, I think, and it's key in the case of, of course, I haven't been to a women in philanthropy reprogram, but my wife goes, not every time, but she does go. You know, a few years ago when she first went, she was the only Asian woman in sight. She was kind of uncomfortable with that, but Cecilia Terasaki shows up, and there's probably some more since then and lighten things up a bit. And I think that would tend to loosen up some purse strings as well. But philanthropy, I think, could be more inclusive, and because there's just a lot of money in the Asian community and there's other communities as well. But I think this networking would facilitate all that.
Mm-hmm. Right, because if you can see someone else who's like you doing what
Right.
you want to do, it makes it that much easier, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So we've talked a little bit about how different organizations have gotten you involved. Have there been organizations that you've, and you don't have to name them, but organizations where you've stopped giving or started giving less? And what was part of that decision?
Once I start, I don't tend to stop, as long as they don't really screw up. And then no, it just keeps going.
Have you experienced some organizations screwing up? And what does screwing up really mean to you?
Misuse of funds. The answer is no. I do track that. I know what's happened recently. So no, I don't think the only mistakes, not major scripts I've seen, are actually on the fundraising side. And you and I talked about this one situation at an unnamed philanthropy where a donor came up with $500,000 and was not invited to next year's annual meetings. How did that happen? I had to call Jeff up and say, Jeff, how come you're not here? I said, what do you mean? That's just an administrative, screw up, if you will. But it's nothing to do with the organization, but it's just a mechanical problem. And that's the only thing I've seen.
Okay. Do you see that a lot? Little administrative issues?
Yes.
Oh.
Yes. And I think that is once upon a time when I really couldn't afford it. This is when I just got to UCLA. I don't know why, but I wrote a pretty small check to the foundation. And to this day, I haven't gotten a thank you note. The person who was handling me at that time left. So I'm sure that in the transition, there was something wrong, but somebody wasn't keeping a list. So I was like, did you get my check? And I'm not sure I even got a response to that, but the check canceled, so somebody got it. But other than that, that's a UCLA.
Yeah, it's interesting to note how much the small things make such a big difference.
Yeah, well, because it's a sign or an excuse, but it's at least a sign that this is not a particularly well-run group and they don't have their act together. That does give some pause to the donors. Well, they can't get thank you notes right, then what else is going wrong? So I think it's incumbent upon organizations to get their administrative act solid.
Yeah, I think so many organizations focus on, their big goals, right? How much are we giving to the mission? How many lives are we impacting? Which is all fantastic. But if you don't have the back end, if you don't have those small things taken care of, that's where you can.
This is all about, the problem, it's all about donor relations.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a fine line. You don't want to be nagging your donors, but it's at the same time, you want to be properly attentive. And where that line is, it's kind of hard to tell, but little things. Like, for example, I just wrote a very small check to the Little Tokyo Service in LTSC, which is a little group on Japanese town. And they're having a fundraiser called Sake on the Rocks, which they've had every year. It's a great event by the museum and the Buddhist church down there. And they raise money for the taiko group and the oboe dancing and all that stuff, so cultural stuff. And I, as part of the fundraiser, they're selling boxes of sushi, overpriced, of course, but I know the chef who makes it, and so I know it's good stuff. So I ordered, a couple $100 worth of sushi, picking up in a month. And within a day, I got this very nice email acknowledging what I got and all that. Now, the point is, I know that they got the money. I sometimes you write a check and you hear nothing, you say, well, did they get the check or not? Or was it misrouted? So simple things like that. But in this case, I forgot her name. Within a day,
No way.
she said, okay, we got it. And by the way, here's your sushi and your pickup time is this and blah, blah, blah. And so, well, okay.
Yeah.
So it's the donor relations piece that I think it's not costly to organizations, but it's the incremental value is pretty big.
Yeah. Well, considering that things have really shifted in the last year and a half, particularly in how organizations have been able to communicate with donors, have you seen any big shifts or changes in how organizations have reached out to you in the last year and a half?
Well, this Sake on the Rocks thing is a case where it was in person, and it was like a big, they took over the museum, Japanese museum, and the Japanese Cultural Center downtown. It was booths and stuff. Now it's all online, and it remains to be seen how well that's going to work on. Now, last year they took quite a hit because they weren't properly organized for that, because this event's in June, July every year, and it was like kind of new to them. So the outreach this year was all online, and it remains to be seen how well they will do generally. Now, as far as me personally, since I'm committed to the group, it kind of didn't matter. But I think other people are mastering Zoom better than others.
Right.
And we'll see.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, as organizations start to think about reopening and being back to big in-person events, do you have any particular things you would recommend or things you think they should think about strategically in the next year to 2 years?
Well, I would expect, or hope at least, that the outreach to prospects, people who have not donated before, would be larger, because you can see people not in Los Angeles, not in the United States, but you got this global footprint that you can get to. And I think following up with people that you normally would not see at an in-person event is something that organizers need to do. I would think that their mailing list would be larger, or their list, at least a list of email addresses, would be longer. And if they're not, it's because they haven't been following up during the pandemic time. But in many ways, pandemic and Zoom and all this has expanded our reach of people. At UCLA, for example, we got more students, at least at Anderson, because we're doing a lot of online tutoring now, not only for degree programs but for certificate programs, because our reach is global now, or more, let's say, more people are taking advantage of our global reach than before. Yeah. So I think that's an important part of this, is capitalize on the expanded set of contacts you made over the past year. I think in person is still important. People still want to meet the beneficiaries of their philanthropy. The kids, the students, the elderly, whatever. I have one student who was a male when I had him, and in the 10 years since then, started a company and became transgender. The company she started had a very nice exit and doing very well. Sold the company, and now her next goal is this transgender Trevor thing, all that. So I think that I'm not sure that would have happened in a regular non-pandemic time, but we'll see about that, because his footprint is much bigger than it would have been otherwise. So anyway, I think people's networks are different. In many ways they're bigger, in many ways they're, let's say, less tight, but you make up for being less tight, less familiar with breadth, and how people balance that off is going to be kind of interesting.
Yeah.
I think in the philanthropic community, that's going to be really important, how you balance that off.
Yeah. Well, we talked earlier about maybe some shifts that are happening in philanthropy with millennial or younger donors. You had some thoughts on what some of their priorities would be. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, I think this whole ESG thing resonates with millennials, certainly with my kids. They're about 30 now. They're in their prime earning years. Now, because of pandemic, they're sitting on more cash than they would have otherwise, because they're just not going out. In both cases, they're involved with startup companies that may be very successful. And so you have this potential of young 30s, late 20s people who have cash, but who have a pretty strong social agenda as well. And I don't think they see philanthropy necessarily in the same ways that baby boomers do. Baby boomers are in many ways concentrated on, let's say, healthcare, because they're old and they worry about cancer. Younger people were more about ESG kind of topics. They're very motivated by climate. These people, young people, understand that they're going to be in the future longer than my generation will. So they worry about climate a lot more than I think baby boomers do, and that makes sense. And I think there's a lot of philanthropy going that way. Not only money, but people actually working for climate change organizations or joining shareholder activist groups, that sort of thing. Yeah. So I think their perspective is quite a bit different. Their social equity is a bigger agenda item. Climate is a bigger agenda item among younger people. And I think philanthropies, if they want to attract a younger generation of people, got to be thinking about those topics, because again, they don't think about philanthropy in the same way that that boomers do, or even people slightly younger than that do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about the access to information within the organization? Do you see maybe with your kids, are they investigating more? Are they digging deeper?
I don't think so. I think if they understand the general reputation and mission of the group, they're not going to do a whole lot of digging until after they made pretty large give. Mm. And if they're going to come with, let's say, 6-figure give, then they're going to dig into a little bit. But if it's a smaller give, then I think they're just concerned about reputation and what they see in the press, and friends. Friends are again important. Maybe faculty or other relatives, people like that. But I don't think the diligence would be necessarily that much greater. In fact, Helen and I don't do a lot of diligence either. We just go to these networking events and say, well, that seems to be a nice person. Nice. Okay, let's do it. And that's about it. And so far, so good. Another thing I do is once you stick with organizations that you kind of know, like Pasadena Education Foundation, UCLA, you kind of know you're dealing with reputable people, period. And so, okay, there may be some mistakes, execution mistakes here and there, but I think we generally agree that these are well-intentioned organizations and not out to steal your money. So therefore, there's not a real need for a lot of diligence.
Yeah, there's not a lot of risk, it sounds like, involved, right?
It's kind of like, this is an issue. This is kind of like how I invest my personal stock portfolio. I'll principally invest in companies where there's a UCLA alumni person, either at the top or just below the top. So it's Broadcom with Henry Samueli, and BlackRock with Larry Fink, Google as this Susan Wojcicki and Nan Bowden, and these are people I know and have taught. And now they got jobs at these companies. So, well, okay, then I'll invest in that company, and that'll be it. That's my diligence. Anil Tamanidi, a student of mine, he did a SPAC of all things, and doing great. So yeah, okay, then so I know these people, and they're either founders or board members, and so I'll invest in the company. It absolves me from doing a lot of diligence, which is
based on the people you trust and know.
Yeah. And so, and you look at the basic numbers of the companies and what they do. Broadcom. Telephone. John Stankey graduated at UCLA Anderson. He's the CEO of AT&T. Well, then you buy AT&T, and that's it. What's wrong there? So, and the same goes with philanthropies. UCLA, PEF, Providence Health, LTSC, Japanese American National Museum. These are nice people. And I go, okay, let's just leave it at that.
What happens if leadership changes?
Well, you go to one of these meetings. I say, at LTSC, Little Tokyo Service Center, they had a guy who died. He was like 43, 44 years old, cancer, and boom, gone. And who's next? So you go and, well, size the person up, say, well, yeah, you were there. Okay, well, we'll stick with it. They promoted from within.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of led you. If you brought somebody from outside, then you kind of say, well, let's see how this is going to work out. But yeah, that would be a factor. Lindsay, is if they brought in somebody. I do like organizations that promote from within, because typically when you do diligence on something, you're looking at the B team as well. And so, yeah.
Interesting. Well, I'd like to conclude our conversation today by asking you if you had one piece of advice to share with a CEO, a president, a director of development at a nonprofit organization, what would that advice be?
Make sure the organization has a really good mission, a mission that would resonate with donors who are really well-meaning. Not every donor has the greatest intentions. But if you can find a core set of donors who are really concerned about the mission, make sure the mission is a good one, that you're consistent with it. Don't stray too far from your knitting. That means establishing a brand, just basic MBA marketing. Have a brand, stick with it, and don't forget the donor relations piece.
Right. Well, thank you so much, George. It's been a great time talking with you. I really appreciate you joining us today.
Lindsay, great seeing you again. If you need more chit chat, I'm glad to step in anytime.
Thanks so much.
Okay.